I have held over 600 dead bodies in my hands. I have seen death in every form it takes. But until the night of October 17th, 2019, I had never seen a dead man open his eyes and look directly into my soul. There is a moment that changed everything for me. A moment I have replayed 1,000 times in my mind. A moment that made me walk away from a career I loved, a calling I had dedicated my life to. And tonight, for the first time, I am going to tell you exactly what happened in that basement. This story was originally shared on Reddit by a mortician who worked in rural Ohio. What you are about to hear is not fiction. It is not a ghost story meant to entertain. It is a memory that still haunts the person who lived it. And by the time I finish telling you this, you will understand why they never set foot in a funeral home again. My name does not matter. What matters is what I did for 7 years of my life. I was an embalmer, a licensed mortician, the person families never see, but always depend on. When someone you love dies, I am the one who makes them look like themselves again. I drain the blood from their veins. I replace it with formaldehyde solution. I suture their mouths closed from the inside. I glue their eyelids shut. I massage their limbs to break the rigor mortis. I dress them, style their hair, and apply makeup so carefully that their family can say goodbye to a face they recognize. It is intimate work, sacred work, and I was exceptional at it. I started at Henderson & Sons Funeral Home when I was 23 years old, fresh out of mortuary school with my license still warm in my wallet. The funeral home sat on the edge of a small Ohio town, population 8,000, the kind of place where the same families have been burying their dead in the same cemetery for 6 generations. The building itself was constructed in 1923. Victorian architecture, wraparound porch, white columns that had yellowed with age. Inside, it smelled the way old funeral homes always smell. Lilies, wood polish, dust, and beneath all of that, something chemical and permanent that seeps into the walls over decades. The embalming room was in the basement. You reached it by walking down a narrow staircase at the back of the building. 17 steps. I counted them every single night. The stairs were original to the house, made of oak that had darkened almost to black over the years. They creaked in specific places. 3rd step, 7th step, 12th step. After a while, you memorize the sounds of a place. You learn its rhythm, its voice. The basement itself was large and cold. Concrete floor with a central drain. White walls that had been repainted so many times the surface was thick and uneven, like scar tissue. 2 stainless steel embalming tables sat in the center of the room, positioned beneath surgical lights that hung from adjustable arms. Along the walls were metal cabinets filled with instruments. Trocars, arterial tubes, aneurysm hooks, eye caps, mouth formers, sealed containers of cavity fluid and arterial solution. The temperature was kept at 58 degrees. Cold enough to slow decomposition. Cold enough that I always wore a sweater beneath my lab coat. I preferred working nights. The silence suited me. No ringing phones. No grieving families waiting upstairs. Just me and the work. I would put in my earbuds, listen to podcasts or audiobooks, and lose myself in the ritual of preparation. There is a rhythm to embalming, a sequence. It becomes almost meditative when you have done it enough times. The dead, I used to believe, were the easiest patients. They did not complain. They did not flinch. They simply lay still and allowed you to give them one final act of dignity. I was wrong about that. The night everything changed began with an ordinary phone call. Harold Benson, the funeral director and my boss, called me at 4:47 in the afternoon. I remember the exact time because I was watching the clock, counting down the minutes until my shift started. Harold told me we had a new arrival. William Crane, 67 years old, died of a massive myocardial infarction at his home that morning. His wife found him in his recliner when she came back from grocery shopping. The paramedics said he was already cold. I asked Harold if there was anything unusual about the case. Any special requests from the family? Any medical considerations I should know about? Nothing unusual, Harold said. Standard preparation. Open casket viewing scheduled for Saturday. I thanked him and hung up. The sun was setting when I pulled into the parking lot. October in Ohio. The sky was painted in shades of amber and rose, the trees along the property line burning with autumn color. Beautiful. I sat in my car for a moment, just watching the light fade. I had no idea it was the last peaceful moment I would ever have. Harold was leaving as I walked in. He was in his 60s, gray-haired, soft-spoken. a good man who had dedicated his life to helping families through the worst days of theirs. He handed me the intake paperwork and told me Mr. Crane was already downstairs waiting. That word stuck with me later. Waiting. I locked the front door behind Harold and stood alone in the quiet of the funeral home. The grandfather clock in the foyer ticked. The floorboards settled. Somewhere upstairs, a pipe groaned in the walls. Old buildings have their own language, their own way of breathing. I walked to the back of the building and stood at the top of the basement stairs. The light was already on below, a pale yellow glow rising from the depths. I started down, counting the steps without thinking. 3rd step, creak. 7th step, creak. 12th step, creak. The cold hit me halfway down. It was always cold in the basement, but that night it felt deeper, more aggressive, like the chill had weight to it. I told myself it was nothing, just the weather changing outside. October could turn on you fast in this part of the country. William Crane was waiting for me on table 1. He was covered with a white sheet, just a shape beneath the fabric, a geography of a human being. The slight rise of the chest, the twin peaks of the feet, the soft mound of the face beneath the cotton. I pulled on my latex gloves with practiced efficiency. I tied my apron. I adjusted the overhead light until it was positioned correctly. Then I reached for the sheet. His face was peaceful. That was my first thought. His eyes were closed. His expression was neutral, almost serene. He had a broad forehead, a strong jaw, the weathered skin of a man who had spent years working outdoors. His hands, when I examined them, were rough with calluses. A farmer's hands. A working man. I checked his fingernails for discoloration. I examined his skin for any signs of trauma or disease. I opened his mouth gently and inspected the oral cavity. Everything appeared normal. Everything looked exactly as it should. I began the preparation. The first step is always the same. You wash the body. Not a quick rinse, but a thorough, respectful cleansing. I used a soft sponge and hospital-grade disinfectant, working systematically from head to toe. I spoke to him as I worked. I always spoke to the bodies. Some embalmers think it is foolish, talking to the dead. But I believed it mattered. I believed they deserved to be treated as people, not objects. I told William Crane what I was doing. I told him I was going to take good care of him. I told him his family was going to see him soon, and that I would make sure he looked his best. He did not respond. Of course he did not respond. But the room felt different. I cannot explain it better than that. As I washed his body, something in the air shifted. The quality of the silence changed. It became thicker, more present, like the basement itself was paying attention. I shook off the feeling and continued. The next step is arterial embalming. I made a small incision just above William Crane's right clavicle, exposing the carotid artery and jugular vein. The tissue was cool beneath my scalpel, bloodless. I inserted the arterial tube and connected it to the embalming machine. Then I inserted the drainage tube into the jugular vein and positioned the waste container beneath the table. I turned on the machine. It hummed to life with a familiar sound, a rhythmic pulsing. The pump began pushing formaldehyde solution through the arterial system, and almost immediately, dark blood began flowing out through the drainage tube. Old blood, dead blood, thick and almost black in the fluorescent light. I watched the gauges. Pressure was normal. Flow rate was normal. I adjusted the solution strength and settled into weight. Arterial embalming takes time. The fluid has to reach every part of the body, pushing out the blood and replacing it with preservative. I usually use this time to organize my workspace, prepare the cosmetics I would need later, or simply stand and observe the process. That is when I heard it. A sound. Faint. Almost imperceptible. Like leather stretching. I froze. My hands stopped moving over the instrument tray. I listened. The sound came again. Louder this time. A slow, creaking groan like old joints being forced to move. It was coming from the body. I told myself it was normal. Bodies make sounds. Gases shift. Muscles contract. Air escapes from the lungs. These are known phenomena. Documented. Scientific. There was nothing supernatural about a body making noise during embalming. But my heart was beating faster, and my hands were not as steady as they should have been. I looked at William Crane's face. His eyes were still closed. His expression had not changed. He looked exactly the same as he had 5 minutes ago. I took a breath. I returned to work. The machine kept pumping. The blood kept draining. I focused on the gauges, on the numbers, on the familiar rhythm of the process. Everything was fine. Everything was normal. Then William Crane opened his eyes. I did not scream. I did not run. I simply stopped. Every function of my body ceased except for my vision. My lungs forgot how to breathe. My heart forgot how to beat. My legs forgot how to move. His eyes were open, wide open, and they were looking at me. Not the glassy, unfocused stare of a corpse. Not the empty gaze of someone who had been dead for hours. These eyes were aware, alert, present. Something was behind them, something that recognized me. For a long moment, we simply stared at each other, me and this dead man on my table. The embalming machine kept humming. The blood kept draining. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. But the world had stopped. Time had stopped. Everything had stopped except for those eyes. Then his mouth opened. Slowly, mechanically. The jaw lowered with a grinding sound, like hinges that had rusted shut. His lips parted. His throat moved. And a sound came out. Not a word. Not a breath. Something between a moan and a whisper. A sound that should not have been possible from lungs that had been still for over 12 hours. The smell hit me then. Not the smell of death. I knew that smell intimately. This was different. Sulfuric. Burning. Like matches struck in a closed room. Like something ancient and wrong. And then William Crane sat up. His body rose from the table in a single, unnatural motion. Not the way a living person sits up, using their muscles, shifting their weight. This was mechanical. Puppet-like. As if invisible strings were pulling him upright from above. His spine straightened with an audible crack. His shoulders rolled back. His head turned toward me, and I heard the vertebrae grinding against each other, a sound like stones being crushed. The tubes were still connected to his neck. The embalming fluid was still pumping into his carotid artery. Blood was still draining from his jugular vein. But he did not seem to notice. He did not seem to care. I stumbled backward. My hip hit the instrument tray and sent it crashing to the floor. Scalpels and forceps and scissors scattered across the concrete like frightened insects. The sound was deafening in the silence. William Crane raised his arm. It moved slowly, deliberately. The motion was wrong in ways I cannot properly describe. Too smooth, too controlled, like something that had never operated a human body before was learning how to use the joints. He pointed at me, one finger, extended, aimed directly at my face. His mouth was still open. That sound was still coming out of his throat. That low, continuous moan that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than his chest. Somewhere that should have been empty. The lights flickered. I am not exaggerating. I am not adding details for dramatic effect. The overhead surgical lights flickered like something was interfering with the electricity. The embalming machine sputtered. The fluorescent tubes buzzed and dimmed. And in that flickering light, William Crane's shadow did not match his body. It was longer, darker. It moved independently, stretching across the concrete floor toward me like a living thing. I tried to speak. I tried to scream. But my voice was gone. My throat had closed. My entire body had become a prison of frozen terror. William Crane leaned forward. His pointing finger was inches from my face now. His eyes were locked onto mine. And in those eyes, I saw something that I will never forget. Recognition. Whatever was looking at me through William Crane's dead eyes knew me. It had been waiting for me. Perhaps for a very long time. His mouth moved. The moan changed shape. Became almost like words. And then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. His arm lowered. His eyes closed. His body settled back onto the table with the slow, heavy weight of the truly dead. The lights stopped flickering. The embalming machine resumed its normal rhythm. The sulfur smell faded. I stood pressed against the cabinet, unable to move, for what felt like hours. My heart was pounding so violently I could feel it in my teeth. My shirt was soaked with sweat despite the cold. My legs were trembling so badly, I did not trust them to hold me. I waited for it to happen again. It did not. William Crane lay motionless on the table. His face was peaceful. His eyes were closed. He looked exactly like a dead body should look. But the tubes were still connected to his neck. The embalming fluid was still pumping. And I had a job to finish. I did not know how I found the strength. Some part of my brain, the professional part, simply took over. It pushed the terror aside and focused on the task. I completed the arterial embalming. I performed the cavity treatment, aspirating the organs with the trocar and injecting cavity fluid. I sutured the incisions. I washed the body again. I dressed him in the suit his family had provided. I styled his hair. I applied cosmetics. And the entire time, I watched his face. I watched his eyes. I watched for any sign of movement. There was none. When I finished, I covered him with the sheet and walked up those 17 stairs faster than I had ever walked before. I locked the basement door behind me. I sat in the front office and watched the clock until Harold arrived in the morning. I never told him what happened. I never told anyone. But I started asking questions. Quietly, carefully. A senior employee named Patricia had worked at Henderson & Sons for over 20 years. One evening, I asked her if she had ever experienced anything strange in the basement. She looked at me for a long moment, the kind of look that holds entire conversations without words. Then she told me about Marcus Henderson. Marcus was the son of the original owner. He worked as the embalmer in the 1970s. People said he was strange, obsessive. He spent far too much time in that basement, even when there were no bodies to prepare. There were whispers about experiments, about things that should not have been done to the dead. In 1978, Marcus went down to the basement and never came back up. They found the door locked from the inside. When they finally broke it down, the room was empty. No body, no blood, no sign of struggle. Marcus Henderson had simply vanished. The case was never solved. Patricia told me that some people believe Marcus never really left, that something of him remains in that basement, waiting, watching, using the dead to reach out. I handed in my resignation the next morning. That was 5 years ago. I work at a hardware store now. I have a wife, a daughter, a life that feels almost normal. But I still dream about that basement. I still see William Crane's eyes opening, his body rising, his finger pointing at me in the flickering light. And I still wonder what he was trying to tell me. Some nights, when the house is quiet and the darkness presses in, I feel it again. That cold presence, that sense of being watched by something that should not exist. And I wonder if something followed me out of that basement. I wonder if it is still waiting. I wonder what happens when I finally hear what it has been trying to say. The dead are supposed to be peaceful, silent, still. But I have learned the truth. Death is not an ending. It is a door. And sometimes that door opens. What do you think happened in that basement? Was it William Crane, trying to deliver one final message? Was it Marcus Henderson, still trapped after all these years? Or was it something else entirely, something ancient and patient that has been waiting in the darkness beneath that old funeral home? I do not have answers. But every time I pass a cemetery at night, every time I see a hearse driving slowly down the street, I remember. I remember those eyes opening. I remember that finger pointing. I remember the sound of a dead man trying to speak. And I know with absolute certainty that some secrets are buried for a reason. Some doors should never be opened. And some bodies should never sit up again.